The purpose of this demonstration is to show how to create a histogram in Excel. I'm going to use the built-in tool with Excel. I'm not going to use any kind of add-in that you might get with a statistics textbook or other source. The data that I'm going to use for the demonstration you can see come from this website, from the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. What I have is I have information about flights arriving to the Salt Lake City Airport on Delta Airlines during the month of September 2011. So let's go to the data, and you'll see we have information about the date, what flight number, where the flights came from, when it was scheduled to arrive, when it actually arrived, and so on. It's a large data set. So in a minute I'm actually going to reduce the data set for my purposes. The variable that I'm going to be interested in is this one, arrival delay. You can see that there are negative numbers here, so let me interpret that number. That number is how long after the scheduled arrival time the flight actually arrived. So a negative number means that it arrived early. So for example, this first case, the scheduled arrival time was 10:36 p.m. It actually arrived at 10:29 p.m., so it was 7 minutes early, so we get a -7. Alright, as I mentioned, I would like to reduce the size of this data for the purposes of this demonstration, this data set. So I am going to filter on the origin airport. I'm going to only look at flights that originated from Atlanta. So I'm going to do that by going to the data ribbon and then selecting filter. That puts a drop down arrow on each of the labels. I'm going to select this drop down arrow, uncheck the box that says select all, and then select the box that says Atlanta and say OK. So now all of the flights that are being displayed at this point are flights that originated from Atlanta. I'm going to click on cell I1 to get to the variable I'm interested in, and then use Control-Shift-Enter to select all of the data in that column. Then I'll use Control-C to copy. Now I'm going to copy it, paste it I should say, to a new worksheet. So I'm going to come down to the label that says, the label of the sheet that says September data, right click that, choose Insert, and then say that I want to insert a worksheet and say OK. The cursor is on A1 and I'm going to use Control-V to paste. I'm going to double click the border there to make it as wide as it needs to be to display. I'm actually going to zoom in a bit. And let me rename this sheet. So down here where it says Sheet 1, I'm going to double click that and I'm going to say that it is the delay time histogram sheet. Alright, so I'm ready to begin my analysis now. I happen to already be on the data ribbon because I filtered there. So now I'm going to go here to the analysis group and select data analysis. That brings up a list of tools, data analysis tools. The one I'm interested in is called Histogram, and they're alphabetical. So I select that tool and say OK, which brings up this dialog box. It's asking, first of all, what data do we want to analyze? So in my case, I want to analyze here what's in column A. I'm going to click on A1 and then use Control-Shift down arrow, and that selects A1 through A237. So altogether I have 236 observations. The A1 is a label. That's why it goes to 237, but that also means that I'm going to click on the labels box here. There's an option to say what kind of class intervals we want to display in our frequency distribution, or what Excel refers to as bins. I could specify the bins. I am not going to do that in this demonstration. I'm going to let Excel determine what bins to use. The next thing I'll do then is say where I want the output to go. I'm going to have the output stay on this sheet, so I'll click on Output Range, immediately click here in this box, and I'll have it start in cell C1. So I'll click on C1. Finally, I'm going to ask it to produce the chart, and so I click on the box at the bottom that says Chart Output. Sometimes it's useful to also show the cumulative percentage, but I'm not going to do that in this case. So I'll say OK, and Excel produces for me two things. First, it produces a frequency distribution, this table here. Second, it creates a pictorial representation of the frequency distribution called a histogram. So that's the meat of it. There are a couple of issues for me with this result. So I'm going to make a couple of modifications to these results, which I would like you to also make each time you do a histogram in Excel. The first modification is to the frequency distribution itself. Excel's routine for creating this distribution is to always make this first bin number equal to the minimum number in the data set. So the smallest number in this data set happens to be minus 37. And not surprisingly, the frequency of observations that are less than or equal to negative 37, there's only one of those, so the frequency shows as 1. Occasionally you might get 2 or 3 if you happen to have some duplicates equal to the minimum, but that's very rare. And that is the reason I don't like this, is because that frequency will almost by definition be 1 every time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine the first two bins. And the way that I'll do that is to add the frequency of the first two bins, so in this case 32 plus 1, or 33, and put that number here to the side of the what's currently the second bin. So I'll type in a 33 manually and hit enter. Now I'm going to delete this first row of the frequency distribution by highlighting those two values and then right-clicking and choosing delete, and then say shift cells up. Okay, so for me this is a much better representation of the data set in terms of what the frequency distribution does and what the picture will show. Let me take a minute to interpret what we've got here. So in this first row, the frequency 33 means that there, in this data set that we have in column A, there are 33 numbers that are less than or equal to negative 19.8. So 33 flights from Atlanta to Salt Lake during the month of September were at least 19.8 minutes early. The next row indicates that there were 120 flights with arrival delay times bigger than negative 19.8 and less than or equal to negative 2.6. The next one says that there were 57 flights bigger than negative 2.6 and less than or equal to 14.6, and so on. The last bin here is always labeled more, and this one indicates that there was one observation that was bigger than 203.8. So the largest delay, the longest delay, was bigger than 203.8 minutes, so more than 3 hours long. Alright, so we've made one adjustment to the output that I always make, and that was to delete to combine the first two bins. The second one is to the picture itself, and that is that a histogram is a representation of continuous data, so there should not be gaps in between the bars. We should show the bars touching each other to represent the continuity. So to fix that, I'm going to double click a bar. It doesn't matter which one, just any bar, so double click there, and that brings up this dialog box. The first choice on the left hand side is series options. That's the one that we want, and you can see that there are 3 options that we can alter. The one that I'm interested in is in the middle, which is called the gap width, and what I'd like is I would like no gap. So I'm going to use this slider, pull it all the way to the left. That changes this number to 0. I could have also directly typed in a 0. And we can't see it because I have it covered up. If I move this over, that actually gives us a preview of what the graph is going to look like. So I'll say close now, and I have my histogram. I'm going to just do a couple other cosmetic things, make this just a little bit bigger. And I don't really need a legend, so I'm going to click on that frequency and then hit the delete key, and that gets rid of the legend. And so now I have this pictorial representation of the distribution of the data. It shows that there's one very large outlier. It shows that it's even without that outlier, the distribution is skewed to the right, because there are some long delays occasionally, but the bulk of the data we actually have, the flights are close to on time, if not early. Okay, that is the conclusion of this demonstration.